Welcome to the Raiders Training Camp Podcast, presented by SiriusXM. Live from the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center, here are your hosts, Jesse Merrick and Eddie Paskal.
Oh, and how about that, man? We got the intro, we're in the lab, it's hot outside, it's hot here in the studio. Eddie Paskal with my man Jesse Merrick, and you heard from the voice of God, Q Myers, in that situation. It is the Raiders Training Camp Podcast presented by the good people at SiriusXM. Jesse, we are here. We have done it. You and I have talked about this day over beers in a professional setting. Like, when are we going to get to camp? When are we going to get to camp? And it has officially arrived, my friend. How are you?
Finally here. It's football season officially, right? We can say that now? I mean...
Yeah, I think so. I think by the letter of the law,
that
is the case.
So it's pretty wild that we're actually here. When you take into and kind of unpack all of what last season was, the off season, all the craziness, the moves that happened, we're finally to the point now where we get to see this team hit the field and develop what they're going to be come kickoff, and I can't wait.
And it's nice to finally be able to, in about, less than 24 hours, to finally see it. Like, we've talked about it a lot, and yes, we've gone through OTAs and mini camp, but it's just different. Camp is a different beast. Camp, like you said, the official start of actually doing this thing for real. And I don't want to talk about, oh, it'll be great to see Chandler Jones on the field. Oh, it'll be great to see what this offensive line in theory could look like. No, dude, in 24 hours, we're gonna see it for real, and we're gonna start being able to learn about this team and tell the story of your 2022 Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, the talk is done. I mean, we're going to continue to talk.
Of course,
obviously that's what we do for a living. But all the talk of the what ifs and all this stuff, it's gone because, as you said, we actually get to see them get in the ground there, hit the ground running, and just see what they can actually do. See what some of these guys look like in silver and black, and see what this offense and this defense and all these questions we have are going to be answered in the coming weeks.
100%. Now, before we get into the business of the Raiders, because we've made some transactions, things are happening. Dave Ziegler and the boys are officially getting into the process of putting a roster together. Before we get into that, we heard from Max Crosby today. We heard from a bunch of players, and we'll react to that sound in a bit. But one thing that stuck out to me, Max was saying, hey, I watched The Last Dance before training camp started last night, get the mind right. What did you do to get in the spirit of training camp, Jesse Merrick?
Man, I mean, for us, honestly, it was always our receiver group would always go do something together, whether it was a meal, whatever it is, go hang out. We always also too, this isn't the same ritual, kind of like what Max had, but we'd always go play basketball.
Okay.
That was our conditioning, getting ready for camp and everything. Not that we weren't working and doing all that stuff, but we would go and play hoops, and I was always a terrible basketball player, so I used it just purely for the cardio sense in that one. But for me, I'm a big music guy. That's the stuff that gets me in the zone, gets me pumped up. So usually each year, whatever song it was over the summer that was my jam, that's the one I would listen to every single day before practice.
Yeah. So I this morning, to get my mind right, to get my spirit right, to get my body right, Jesse, got my hair cut. Shout out my guy LK. Had to go in, get the fade where it needs to be. We're going through a growth process here on the top and on the sides, as you can see. But yeah, man, it's good to just kind of hit the the reset button to kind of understand all right, enjoy my 45 minutes, get my scalp massage, get the hot towel treatment, and we're gonna do it for real. But speaking of doing things for real, we have officially begun trimming this roster in some sense, and trimming might be too strong of a word, but we have transactions before the Raiders hit the field tomorrow. Just a few things that we should hit off the top. So yesterday, which is Tuesday, today's Wednesday, right?
Yes,
yeah, I think so.
I had to think about that for
Wednesday.
a second. Yeah,
that's another beautiful thing at camp. What day of the week is going to leave very, very quickly.
Yeah.
By the weekend, I'll be like, oh, today's Tuesday, whatever. But yesterday, the Raiders made the following moves. They placed defensive tackle Jonathan Hankins, cornerback Trayvon Mullen, and defensive tackle Bilal Nichols on the physically unable to perform list, a.k.a. the PUP list, and they signed wide receiver Isaiah Zuber. So, quick thoughts. I know that the fans, and it's a very kind of guttural reaction to hearing the PUP list names. Every team is going to have guys start the season on the PUP list. The Raiders are obviously no exception to that rule. If you were to ask me concern 1 to 10, 1.5. I mean, not a lot of huge surprises there. I don't think there was any shock that Trayvon started the season on the PUP list. I mean, maybe a little surprise with Bilal and Hankins, but it's day one of camp. I'm not too concerned. Where do you kind of come in on that?
No, I'm with you. I think you're right on par right there with 1.5. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, at day one, they haven't even hit the field for practice yet. Obviously, it's not great if someone starts on PUP, but at the end of the day, there's still such a long runway until we get to the first preseason game, let alone the first game of the season. So I don't think it's anything massive. And again, you guys have 50 million D tackles.
Yeah.
So get some of those guys some reps. Bilal and Big Time Hank, I think they can take their time and get out there. I don't think it's anything to panic about or worry about at all. Obviously we'll see as the weeks go on if this, is something that continues. But at the moment, no way.
Yeah, I mean, talk to me in like 2 weeks. Like 2 weeks from now, if we haven't seen Bilal and we haven't seen big time Hank, like, okay, maybe we can up that 1.5 to like a 2.5 or 3. But as we get here, start preparing for the first practice tomorrow, Thursday morning, very little concern. Another roster move Dave Ziegler and company made today, Dallin Levitt, no longer in silver and black, friend of the program, Dallin Levitt. And I know that we've talked about this a bunch. The fans always felt some type of way about Dallin. They always, everyone seemed to have an opinion on this guy. But for better or for worse, he was a really good special teamer, a core special teamer, and just a unique move, an interesting move as we get ready to start this thing off for real tomorrow.
Yeah, I never understood the hate that man got, because there are guys on every single team, much like him, that are solid core special teamers. And, look, if a guy like him is out there playing in a game, obviously something went wrong. So the guy's in there trying to do all he can. But I think Dallin Levitt was one of those guys, very valuable special teamer that I think they are going to miss, in that aspect of the game. And he's a guy that I think, honestly, will get another job somewhere else. I do too. I don't think he's going to be waiting around too much longer, because teams need guys like that for the team's aspect of, your game. So, you've got your glue guys for the whole team. You've got your glue guys for special teams as well. And if you're going to have a good unit, you need somebody that's going to, kind of captain, and maybe not necessarily in the sense of being your special teams captain, but is going to captain that unit, whether it's the punt team, the kick return team, to whatever it is. Someone's going to go out there and play like their hair's caught on fire. You need that.
Yeah, and 100%. And now, as we get ready for camp, it'll be interesting to see who fills that role for your 2022 Las Vegas Raiders. Obviously nothing we'll see today or tomorrow or have a real good idea on until really we get to the preseason, but a job has been created. Someone is going to go and take that job, and I'm excited to see who it is.
Yeah, me too. I mean, look, we talked about it a bit, on the podcast over the last couple of weeks there, but, some of the underrated storylines and some guys that may emerge, keep an eye on Teamer. We talked about him. Got the perfect name for it, but also a guy that could kind of slide into that role.
100%. And speaking of things that we see today or we're going to see tomorrow, we heard today for the first time from 4 members of the Las Vegas Raiders. We heard from John Simpson, we heard from Hunter Renfrow, Denzel Perryman, and Max Crosby. And it was interesting for me, and I think that the kind of kickoff media session of training camp is always interesting because guys talk before they've actually practiced and actually done anything for real. But I think it's a valuable kind of lesson in kind of getting the state of the team, kind of getting a mindset of the guys as they get ready to do it the very next day. And one thing that really stood out to me is you heard from all these guys, and they all have their own kind of little flavor, and they're all going to, kind of sprinkle it in their own way. But they were all asked about the expectations of the 2022 Las Vegas Raiders, and for good reason, right? This is a team coming off of a playoff berth a year ago. This is a team that added some big dog free agents, and a team that, if you were a fan, you're expecting this team to make some noise. And they were all asked about those expectations, and they all, in their own way, very politely said, hey, that's your deal. Last year is last year, and we're focusing on 2022. And I thought that was telling.
Yeah, look, you could see the smirk on everyone's face, as the question was asked. Because, look, they all know it's coming. But let's be honest, like, at the end of the day, it's good to have expectations. You don't want to go to the season where everyone's like, maybe they'll get the first pick. That's not what you're looking for. You're looking for a team that's got expectations. You earn those expectations. So I think for them, it's a good to be being asked those questions, but also seeing the way that they handled them, like, whatever. And also, too, like, the thing with me, like, I'm never a guy to ask those expectations questions simply because, like, these guys are professional athletes. They are at the top of their game. Nobody's going to put more expectations on them than their own self. Like, that's the thing. And I know that's so cliche to say, but, like, these guys are some of the most driven individuals in the world. You think a couple expectations from people like us in the media are going to, make them nervous or whatever it is? Like, no, like, they know their jobs are literally on the line for this stuff.
And I thought Denzel Perryman had a great kind of just response to it, where he did it in kind of that classic Denzel Perryman way, where he smiled, he flashed those pearly whites, he kind of gave the side eye, and he goes, "Hey man, you guys are talking about that. Like, this is not something that we're discussing." And I thought that John Simpson, he had a really good line on it too, where he said, "You know what? They're just words." Right? Like, you guys can attach whatever you want to this team. You guys can kind of make these expectations, make these decisions about who we are and what we're going to be. And he goes, they're just words. At the end of the day, like, we have to go out there starting tomorrow, put the work in, and see where the chips fall come, hopefully February.
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, for them, like, do they have those same expectations? For sure. But that's what they've got coming into every single camp, every single, training camp as you start the year, all that different stuff. So for them, it's just a matter of like, hey, now let's go put in the work. I think for them, like Denzel even said, the first day of camp and everything is kind of like the first day of school. Like for them, it's that excitement is to be able to go and meet those expectations, to be able to actually put the work in. Like at the end of the day, these guys have been doing all the boring stuff, the lifting, the running, all that stuff, and now they actually get to play football and chase after those expectations. So like this is the side of that they're not probably going to be weighed down by like, oh man, we're nervous, whatever. Like they're probably excited to get out there and put that work in to see, what the fruits of their labor eventually turn into.
Yeah, and speaking of dudes who have put in work and have really put in, candidly, 11 months of work, we heard from him today, is Max Crosby. And we heard from Max, and the Max that we heard from today, I tweeted it out, like, we put so much emphasis, and for really good reason, on how good Max is on the field, right? He's I think he deserves a ton of credit for kind of changing that narrative of sacks and pressures a year ago. And now it's very in vogue. Oh, let's look at the pressures instead of the sacks. Well, I don't remember us doing that 2 years ago, but whatever. But we put so much emphasis on what Max does on the field, on the numbers, on pressuring the quarterback, on being a beast stopping the run. But I don't think we put enough enough emphasis on how good he is off the field and the intangibles that he brings. And we heard from Max today for the first time of camp. And the Max Crosby that stepped to that podium was a poised Max Crosby, was a confident Max Crosby, was a Max Crosby very much in control of what he wanted to say and do. And that was a team leader. That was a guy who is now a veteran presence in this locker room and is a dude that is going to set the tone for what this defense wants to do in 2022. And, Jesse, I've shared this story with you, and I think we've talked about it before, but you talked about Max kind of, having that return on investment, right? Where the day that he signed that big extension, I was here ungodly early. I forget why. I don't know why I was here at like 6:30, but I was here at 6:30, and you know who drove in right behind me? Is Max Crosby. Yeah. And he was just here literally the day that he's going to have the biggest payday of his life up until now, and he was here at 6:30 in the morning going to put in work. And I think that, in a nutshell is who he is, who he wants to be. And I think that now, and it tripped me out when he said this, going into year 4, right? Like, he's a dude that's going to set the expectation on this defensive line, along with Chandler Jones.
Yeah, and I think if you're a member of Raider Nation, like, that just has to fire you up so much, hearing stories like that. For me, I was blown away. I shouldn't have been surprised, but when you guys introduced Sandra Douglas Morgan as the new president, Max was there. Like, you don't see players at stuff like that. It was over at Allegiant Stadium. It wasn't here at the headquarters. Like, so he made a point to show up and be there. Like, this is a guy that has been so present and so visible since signing that deal. And also, we talk about this team, offensively, guys like Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow, and Devontae Adams, who are going to have to sacrifice a bit in terms of stats, and being low-ego guys. Well, on the other side of the ball, they're led by a guy in Max who's as low-ego as they come right now in that position, too. And that's the thing, is you can't really say that about a lot of different teams. So, like, you got to be just so fired up as a Raider fan that you can go into this thing and think, man, like, we don't have just, like, we're not led by divas. There's not this, like, oh, man, how's this person going to react? Like, Max is just one of those dudes going to go in and work. He talked about how he went and trained and did some MMA work in the offseason, watching what those guys go through and all this stuff. And for him, it was, like, pushed him even more. Like, I just think that's cool because Max just seems like a guy that's just that lunch pail, going to go to work, do whatever he can to get better.
And the one thing that also stood out to me, and it kind of as we, like, talk about this Max, I don't want to say story arc at all, but kind of who he is, like, off the field, is the fact that he's now picking the brains of people that, like, hey, how does Brady make it work? Yeah. How do some of these, like, all-time Hall of Fame, like, legitimate GOATs, how do they go about business, and how do they make it work, and what can I do to kind of get to that place? And I don't know if we saw or heard that Max Crosby like 2-3 years ago, right? And to be fair, at that point, he's a young dude still trying to figure it out, hey, how can I be the best version of myself? Where do I fit in kind of the ecosystem of the silver and black? And now he knows. And he's like, okay, I know who I am. I'm a team leader. I'm a Pro Bowl guy. I'm a dude who's made his money, and I want to take it to the next level. How do I do that? Like, that to me is pretty telling.
That, and also just a simple fact of, like, he's not resting on his laurels of, like, hey, this is the training program that got me here. Yeah. This is the work ethic that got me here. Like, he's continuing to evolve and trying to continue to push the envelope, which I think is massive. Like, a lot of guys around the league do that, but I don't know if it's necessarily to that same level. Like, again, how many, defensive ends, and granted, it's Brady we're talking about here, like, the GOAT. But, like, how many defensive ends are asking about what a quarterback does to prepare, what their mindset is, and all this different stuff? Like, it's just cool that he's open to learning from guys that don't even play his position. And then also add in the fact that now he does have a guy like Chandler Jones, over 100 sacks. I mean, the sky's the limit for what he can learn and continue to grow with what he's got ahead of him.
And I know this has kind of become the Max Crosby Love Fest podcast, but, like, I think another thing that's really impressive to me is that Max has a way of kind of delivering his message and saying, like, yo, this is what works for me, and different things work for other guys, and that's not bad. There's a million different ways to do this because this is what works for me. And like to your point, he's a guy who's curious and is always tinkering and he's figuring out, okay, like for Brady, this is great. For Chandler Jones, this is great. How do I take the best parts of what they do and make it work for Max Crosby?
Yeah, and that's the smartest way to go about doing it because not everything's going to work for each individual person. So, you take, you listen, you absorb, be that sponge, and then you apply and figure out what's going to stick and what's going to help you get to that next level. And I think having that awareness, again, it's still a young age. Like I said, 4 years in the league. I mean, that's crazy. And what he's already achieved, as you said, the pressure might as well just be a Max Crosby stat. I mean, that's what he's done in terms of changing the game and bringing the awareness of that kind of, level of play. And so that's where I think we do see more levels and layers continue to be added to his game as he keeps implementing all those different things and just kind of changing the way people rush the quarterback.
And I think we have a pretty good idea of what we're going to see from Max in 2022. I think that there's obviously a lot of intrigue surrounding how that partnership between him and Chandler is going to work. But I think by and large, we know what to expect from that group. Now, the depth pieces we're going to learn about, the interior of the defensive line is something that I know that we both really are looking forward to see starting tomorrow. But an area of this team that we have a lot of questions about, and you and I have talked about this before, is the offensive line. And John Simpson was the member of the offensive line who happened to speak today. And I think he said a lot of really illuminating things. But one thing that stood out to me is he talked about now going into this year, going into 2022, and now having more familiarity with Colton Miller, with Andre. I think that I know we've discussed it a bunch, that the fact that they've had these reps together, albeit perhaps not in the best circumstances a year ago, but they're going to be beneficial going forward. So I think that over the next 3-4 weeks, seeing that group gel, whatever that front five is going to be something that I'm going to be excited to watch.
And look, it's not as flashy or sexy, but he also noted off the field as well. That was a part of them meshing and gelling in that sense. And honestly, outside of a quarterback and receiver, I believe that, having the offensive line mesh is the most important thing in terms of that continuity. You need that. Again, I had mentioned many times on the pod with you, other pods, about how Ziegler talks about the offensive line as a developmental position. Well, they're also developing that chemistry along with their work on the field as well. And so that's where, the communication comes into it, where, much like you see with a quarterback and a receiver, they can give them the nod, whatever it is, or they're just on the same page, knowing what the other person is thinking. And that is built off the field in the offseason, going through all those things, even when you're chilling, having a barbecue, whatever it is. That building that chemistry is massive, and then having those reps under your belt, especially in a new offense, when you're learning and growing, that's where they can lean on each other as well, because maybe they won't have the mastery of the scheme, but they know what the guy next to them brings to the table, and that's going to make life a lot easier on them.
And I think, not Dylan, John had the line at the press conference for me. He was asked about Dylan Parham, and I mean, dude, this guy's, his eyes got all big, and he just laughed. He goes, he's a good little rookie.
Yeah.
He's a good little, I wonder what Dylan Parham, I wonder how many pairs of pads he's going to carry throughout camp, how many lunches he's going to have delivered. But we speak about that connection and that continuity and the off the field stuff. And it's great to see, and I keep having to emphasize this, on day one, it's great to see on day one that Dylan Parham, the rookie, the top guy from this year's draft class, is ingratiating himself with this group, and they're having fun with him, right? Camp is supposed to be, in some senses, fun, right? It's a grind, it's very repetitive, it's monotonous, and you got to be able to have fun with the dudes that you're going to work with every day.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, it's a game.
Yeah.
These guys are getting paid a lot of money to play a game, and I think that's something that this team realizes by also taking it very seriously, obviously. But I think they realize that when you hear, guys that have left this group and go on to other teams, or the guys here as well, just talking about how this locker room, the atmosphere, it's just different. The energy, that's there within that group, and that's the part that for me, being able to cover this team makes it exciting, because when there's a good energy around a group, man, it's so much more fun to be around it, Imagine you got friends, whoever it is, it's just, everything, Eeyore, Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You come into work, and it's exciting to come into work when there's that energy, that buzz around it. And that's where I think it feeds into the offensive line as they continue to try and make strides. Because as we've talked about before, this offense is only going to go as far as those guys take them.
And we've talked about things that'll be different. And I think, all the guys who spoke today were asked about, some of the changes or some of the unique wrinkles that maybe this coaching staff has compared to ones that have been in the past. And we were talking before we started rolling, and you were talking about Foster Moreau going on Bussin' with the Boys with friend of the program, Will Compton. Shout out to Will one time.
Free shout out for them.
Exactly. Yeah, no free shout outs, but he's getting a free one right there.
Yeah.
But when you were telling me about something that was really interesting in terms of how Foster said that Josh is kind of putting together like a practice, a session, and kind of making sure that, hey, we're not living in a world where it's the wide receivers here and the tight ends over here.
Yeah, for me, that was what stuck out the most, in what he was talking about, because Will was really pushing him for like, hey, I want to know.
Oh, Will was pushing him?
Will,
Shocker.
Yeah, right. He was pushing him in the sense of like, hey, give me some examples of how this staff is different, or the details and things like that. And that's where he brought up the fact that, he said the word that he used was they're not independent contractors anymore in terms of meeting within their position groups, the tight ends, the receivers, the running backs. Obviously they still do some of that because that's necessary, but he said they're doing a lot more meeting of the entire offense together. So think about it. When you're in there, he noted that they'd hear him talk about like, when a coach, offers something to Devontae, how to run his route, how to, shake a guy, whatever. And Foster was like, I get to hear that. So for him, he's learning a tool that's being taught to Devontae and Devontae's response to that. So he can be like, hey, I'm going to toss that in my bag as well. And so you're also learning wholesale what everyone is learning, what everyone's going to do. So you have a better understanding of what's going on around you. It's okay if you understand your assignment, but if you don't know what's going on around you, like you're not worth anything in this sense, So having a full wholesale understanding, I think, is massive for the team.
And Hunter Renfrow said something really similar to that today, where he was asked about Devontae and kind of what he's going to bring to the table. And he goes, look, I get to learn from him too. Like this is a guy who's obviously at the top of his craft, a guy who is going to have a lot of records when all is said and done.
Yeah.
But for Hunter, he's like, I get to learn from this guy every day. Like I can, to your point, I can kind of pick and choose what works for him and how I can make that work for me. And I think that's so valuable when we look at this group, and to use your term wholesale, when we look at the wide receiver group as a collective, right? There's not an expectation that Hunter Renfrow is going to have the same numbers that he did a year ago. And that's fine.
Yeah.
That is 100% okay. There's probably an expectation that Devontae isn't going to have the same numbers he had last year. And again, that is totally fine. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see over the next couple weeks how that group really forms and how they come together, because we know what to expect out of Devontae. We know what to expect out of Hunter Renfrow. We'll include Darren Waller in this group for the sake of this conversation. We know what to expect from Darren. But who are the guys that are going to really fill this group out and turn it into just that, a group?
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing that we're going to kind of be watching. The pieces, much like, as we were talking about guys on special teams that are kind of those glue guys, the depth pieces and things like that. And that's where, a guy like DeMarcus Robinson, that was one guy he did talk about, right? Talking about his ability down the field and doing a great job of like towing the line, in terms of when you're out of bounds, by not taking himself out of position and stuff like that. And that's where I think, again, having a guy like Devontae in that group, I mean, just the receivers alone, that's a masterclass on being a wide receiver in the NFL every single day. And that's, if you don't think that's going to permeate through the entire group, you're crazy. It's also going to permeate through the entire offense as well, even all the way down to the offensive lineman, to see the way that guy goes about his business every single day.
And I cannot wait because it starts tomorrow, Jesse Merrick. So speaking of tomorrow, and tomorrow is practice 1, so call it day 2, but practice 1. We're not going to see a ton, right? Like they're not going to be in pads. We're not going to hear people thudding up, but realistic expectations going into tomorrow, because tomorrow is a day that all of us, myself included, have had circled on the calendar for a minute.
Yeah, for me, expectation, high energy, because if we hear them all talking about that it's high energy, all this different stuff, well, let's see it, It's a first day of camp, first day of school type of vibe. Like, is that the atmosphere that we are going to see out of this group? Where, again, by still being like, we're going to work, but like having that excitement, that energy around it, knowing this is the first brick that we're laying on the foundation for what this season's going to be.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And one thing that I'm really kind of looking forward to is kind of getting our first, I think, real taste of the uniqueness of a Josh McDaniels-led practice.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we've gone through OTAs and minicamp, and there's a lot of things that we can take from that to what we're going to see tomorrow. But tomorrow's the first real one, right? Like, I can't imagine there's a more excited person in this building than Josh McDaniels, right? Because he gets to go to practice tomorrow for the first time, too. So I think seeing kind of what we're going to, what a Josh McDaniels practice looks like. Are we going to see Dave Ziegler down on the grass? I know he's talked to me a bunch about how important it is for him to be down there, not every day and kind of, there in a consistent sense like that. But he's like, I got to be there. Like, I want to see these guys. I want to hear them. I want to learn from them in person what they bring to the table. So I think seeing that, hearing that, feeling a Josh McDaniels training camp practice tomorrow is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, we got to see it in OTAs, but it's not the same.
Not the same.
Not the same as camp. And so, like you said, he has to be so fired up and his entire staff to be able to really sink their teeth into this group. And again, I keep saying it, but like lay those bricks down for what it's going to be. And that's the part where you really get to see, all right, this is the idea that I've had in my head of, after learning in Denver and learning in New England for all those different years, now I get to dive into this. This is my team. This is how we're going to do it. What elements does he take from New England? What elements does he take from other areas? What are some of the things that kind of stand out to all of us in that sense? And also another thing that I like to watch for is just I look at the bodies of these guys, see who kind of changed in the offseason. Because, again, they're not in pads yet. They're not hitting. They're not doing that stuff. So you get a good vibe and a good look at, I guess more so how different these dudes are and how different they come back. And that's where you really get a look at, man, this guy is a massive human being.
And thankfully it hasn't been the case for us for a few years, but you also see the other side of the coin where you see guys that maybe didn't do what they were supposed to over this past 5-6 weeks and come back a step slow, right? And like I said, the Raiders have been really fortunate that hasn't been the case in a while, but it's just checking of the box and okay, all these guys, and Dave Ziegler told us before the end of the offseason program, at the end of the offseason program, he said, look, our expectation is these guys come in day one of camp ready to go, and we're going to notice the guys that did. We are going to have a very keen eye and see players 1 through 88 came in fantastic shape and they're ready to hit the ground running. And I think we talked about that expectation. It's setting the expectation of what Raider football looks like going forward.
It is. And that's where, first day of camp, always sticks out. I remember for me last year was Max and Unique flying around everywhere. From drill to drill. That's where you see those are the guys that, they say when they're asked about it, they talk about the work that they put in and all this stuff, but you can see it on the field. You don't see guys dragging and things like that. That's what you look out for. As you noted, then you can see, maybe this guy didn't quite train in the heat because it's hot out here. Yeah. Maybe this guy didn't quite get enough sprints, lifts, whatever the heck it was in. You start to get a vibe for how prepared, guys are right from the get-go, and also which guys are like, hey, I'm going to put my body through the ringer so that I can hit the ground running, or the guys that are like, hey, I enjoyed my off season and camp is what gets me going, for the year and all that stuff. That's kind of my conditioning program. That's, I think, tells you a lot about what guys are going to stick on a team.
Yeah, 100%. And we are going to talk about it all later this weekend. Like I said, we're going to lose track of the days, but I cannot wait. So Raiders Training Camp Podcast, Episode 1, presented by the good people at SiriusXM, in the books. Jesse, let's go to practice tomorrow. Let's take some notes, and then we will see you guys later this week. And I can't wait, man. Let's do it.
I cannot wait. It's going to be so much fun, man. We get to actually watch football. We get to talk about it. Oh, it's going to be fun.
Nothing better. And we'll see you guys this weekend. And make sure that you subscribe to the Raiders Podcast Network, subscribe to this, turn on your push notifications, all that jazz, and we will catch up with you guys in a few days.
SiriusXM puts you inside the Raiders training camp. Catch all the info on the team, plus your music, talk, comedy, and more. Subscribe now and get your first 3 months free. Be there with the Raiders.